Good evening and welcome to the second program of the 2021 Film and Discussion Series, brought to you by the Woodstock Land Conservancy, Woodstock Transition, and Woodstock Jewish Congregation. Tonight's event is creating community solutions to our housing challenges and why what we do matters. Our program will include several short videos and some presentations from Evelyn Wright, the Deputy County Executive and Chair of the Ulster County Housing Advisory Committee. And we'll also hear from Susan Goldman and Kirk Ritchey, who are co-chairs of the Woodstock Housing Committee. After the presentations, there'll be a nice long question and answer period. And you should post your questions at any time you'd like during the program in the Q&A box. To make sure that our moderator sees your question, please do not put them in the chat box because she will be monitoring the Q&A box. And for starters, just without further ado, we're going to watch a short video of Woodstock's town historian, Richard Hepner, on the subject at hand.
Hello, I'm Richard Hepner, Woodstock Town Historian, and I'm here to give you the history of Woodstock housing over the past 233 years. I'll be brief. For about half of Woodstock's history, housing was simply a matter of what people could build on the land they own. That began to change following the Civil War, however, when the tanning and bluestone industries began to fade and people began to see economic benefit not in what they could take from the land, but rather in what others saw in the land. In short, summer visitors to Woodstock were absorbed by boarding houses and mountain houses. Change also began to come with the arrival of the artists in the first part of the 20th century and the establishment of the Bird Cliff and Maverick colonies and the arrival of the Art Students League. And the arrival of a number of young artists also began a process where barns, sheds, and anything they could find was converted into housing. But the artists and the attention Woodstock was getting also brought folks with some money from the city, and the rise in second home ownership began through the first half of the 20th century. The next major phase in housing change was when IBM came to Kingston and Rotron began expanding. This brought in people who had fairly well-paying jobs, and particularly in the Xena area, new houses began to rise. So did the value of homes generally in Woodstock. And yet, even into the 60s and 70s and the arrival of the counterculture, renting was still fairly easy in Woodstock, and while some preferred a tent in the woods, apartments and poorly heated cabins, and I knew a couple, were not difficult to find. And though real estate prices continued to rise naturally, the real change in rental and home prices began as we crossed into the 21st century, and there began an exodus from New York, especially following 9/11. As more people began to take up residence in Woodstock, buying and renting, prices began to quickly price out, for example, young people who grew up here. The whole cycle really accelerated with the advent of short-term rentals over the last number of years. Apartments and rentals increasingly began to go to visitors rather than long-term renters. And while Woodstock was the first town in Ulster County to pass a short-term rental law, prices have accelerated to the point where it's going to be difficult to ever put the genie back in the bottle. Unfortunately, today, the Colony of the Arts has little available for young musicians, young artists, or those who work in our shops. Diversity is diminished, and the eclectic nature we once took pride in as a community is ebbing away. That raises the question, what is the future of housing in Woodstock? Thank you.
Well, I think the fact that there are over 100 people signed into this webinar at the moment in streaming attests to the fact that there are a lot of you out there are concerned about what Richard's just been talking about. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Susan Goldman, co-chair with Kirk Ritchey of the Town of Woodstock Housing Committee. The committee was formed after adoption of the town's comprehensive plan in 2018. Our current members are pictured here on the corner of Rock City Road and Tinker Street with the wonderful poster campaign that was created for us by Terry DeGrossa of Echo 66. We wanted to help dramatize the town's housing need, and perhaps you've seen this poster with the little house that Rennie Cantine built next to it. Our current committee members are Bob Young, Deborah Meyer-Dewan, Urena Kinlan, and Kirk Ritchey and myself as co-chairs. Richard Hepner is our town board liaison, and Maria Elena Conte has been acting as the supervisor's liaison, specifically working on the home share project, which you'll hear more about later. We have had more people on our committee in the past 2 years, and we hope to have more soon, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. For 2 years, our committee has been reading about housing and talking to local and regional housing experts, honing our understanding about the challenges and hearing about promising strategies to create housing that Woodstockers can afford. This evening, we've invited you all to share our sense of urgency about the cost of doing nothing about Woodstock's housing challenge, and also to share our excitement about the possibilities that our committee has been discovering. We want to jump in with important background to draw a clear picture of the challenges we all face, because we believe we all are facing this challenge, and we all have to work to change it. We've asked Evelyn Wright, Deputy County Executive and Chair of Ulster County's Housing Advisory Committee, to help us describe the nature of the problem by the numbers. And I give you Evelyn Wright.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to try to put my slides up here. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. I've been working on a housing study that we call the Housing Action Plan at the county level since last June, and it's been really wonderful to be in conversation with the Woodstock Housing Committee throughout that. And I'm really delighted to be here. The county's Housing Action Plan should be released in the next couple of weeks, and I have some information from the study to share with you tonight. So the goals of our Housing Action Plan were, first of all, to really take a look at the data and try to understand as much as we can about what the housing situation is in the county and how it varies across the county. And then from there to understand what are the factors that have been driving our housing affordability crisis, and see what strategies we can use to increase housing supply throughout the county. And our most fundamental goal was to really help facilitate a community-wide conversation about how we can work together to address our housing crisis. And so I'm just absolutely delighted to be part of your conversation here in Woodstock. I want to take a moment to just acknowledge the 9 individuals who served on our Housing Advisory Committee in 2020 and worked hard on our study. And in particular, Deb Dewan, who is also a member of the Woodstock Housing Committee. And she did just a wonderful job bringing information back and forth between the Woodstock Committee and the county level committee. These folks gave us a real diversity of perspectives and a really excellent service in helping us understand what the housing issues looked like on the ground from their perspectives. So I'll share with you some of the key things we learned in looking at the data. First of all, Ulster County's population is aging. The median age continues to rise, as does the fraction of the population that's over 55. And one of the implications of that for housing is that there are many folks in our community who really want to stay in their communities, but not necessarily in the home that they're in. They may be ready to downsize, to move to a home that's smaller, perhaps easier to maintain. And when they can't find something suitable to move into, then their home is also not freed up for a young family who might be ready for the home that they're in. So addressing the needs of seniors in our community is really essential. We also found that incomes have been stagnant or declining except for the highest earners in our community. I'll show you some data on that. And on the other hand, while incomes have been stagnant, housing prices and rents have continued to rise. So those two things together have really put the squeeze on our residents, to the point that across the county, nearly 1/3 of homeowners and more than half of renters live in homes that are unaffordable. This usual standard for affordability is that you spend no more than 30% of your income on housing costs. So we have more than 1/3 of homeowners and more than half of renters who are spending more than that. And of course, the COVID pandemic has only exacerbated these trends. So I'll show you some of the data that paints this picture. First of all, to look at incomes. Folks who study populations often separate them into what we call quintiles, meaning dividing the population into fifths and taking 20% and looking at the data across that. So if we divide the population into quintiles by income, where the lowest quintile has the lowest average income and the highest quintile has the highest, we compared the incomes, these are annual incomes, between 2010 and 2018 across those quintiles. And so you can see the lowest earners in our community have the steepest drop in their average income, from $16,500 to just over $14,000, or a 14% decrease in that time. As we work our way up the income spectrum, you can see that decline gets less steep, but only the highest 20% saw an increase in their incomes, from just under $200,000 to $209,000. And the top 5% of earners saw an even steeper increase. And it's this skewing of our incomes and the increase in inequality that's driving up home prices on the one hand and making it far more challenging for folks near the bottom end of the spectrum to afford housing. When we look at what our typical salaries are in some of our top employment sectors, you can see that none of these are anywhere near that top 20% band. And what we'll see is that, in fact, none of these average salaries are enough to carry housing costs where they are now. So approximately a fifth of our residents work in government. This also includes public education and working at the SUNY schools. There, the average wage is about $60,000 a year. In some of our other top sectors, wages are even lower. So around $43,000 in healthcare and social assistance, around $30,000 in retail, and $22,000 in accommodations and food services. So you can see that's getting us into those first and second quintiles where wages have really been decreasing over time. Manufacturing at $50,000. So at the same time that incomes have been declining, home prices have been rising. You'll see the bottom line here is the median single family home price in the county, rising from just over $200,000 to just under $250,000 in the years from 2013 to 2019. You can see in this top line that increase has been much steeper within Woodstock. So rising from around 300,000 to over 400,000. I don't have such strong data on rentals because those are harder to get numbers on. Of course, the county records every sale, a home sale in the county, but we don't have such data on rent. But what I can show you is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development does a study every couple of years on what they think the fair market rent is. And so they peg the fair market rent within Ulster County as a whole at $1,155 for a 2-bedroom apartment. Now this is 2018, and they do it for the county as a whole. So you see there's no difference for Ulster County and Woodstock. We know from talking with folks who rent or anyone who's looked for an apartment recently that this is an out-of-date number, that it's rents are even more expensive now. But what I'd like to show you on this slide is just how far out of reach housing is for rental housing is for the average renter. So if we take that 30% of income that you can spend on housing and still have it be affordable, in order to afford that $1,155 a month rent, you would need to earn an annual wage of $46,200 or an hourly wage of just over $22 an hour. But the average renter in 2018 earned just over $13 an hour in the county as a whole, a little bit higher in Woodstock, but not much, at just over $14 an hour. And so they could afford a rent that was just around $700 a month, or 400 and some dollars a month less than the fair market rent. Another way to put that is that they would have to work over 60 hours a week at their actual wage in order to afford that fair market rent apartment. And so you can see just how unaffordable this really is. It's really completely out of reach for anyone earning that average renter wage. And of course, these are the folks who are working in our restaurants, our supermarkets, our retail shops, some of our care professions, home care, healthcare, are earning these wages and really just simply cannot afford the rents. Now, I want to show you some information about how the housing challenges vary across the county. Because I would say, after looking at the data, we have a housing crisis everywhere in the county, but the drivers are different and the effects are different. And so these two maps show you how two different aspects of the housing challenge are distributed across the county. The map on the left shows you the median household income in each municipality in the county. And you can see that they vary from the lighter colors, which have a median household income around $40,000 a year, to the darker colors that are up around $80,000 a year. And so you see that there's quite some variation, about a twofold variation across the county. Woodstock is right in the middle of that distribution. The map on the right shows you the percent of households in each municipality that are what they call severely cost burdened. So unaffordable is when you spend more than 30% of your income on housing. Severely cost burdened is when you spend more than 50% of your income on housing. At that point, you can imagine that there's almost no wiggle room for anything else in a family budget. So a family that is severely cost burdened is now vulnerable to total disruption of schooling, of work, and even of losing their home with any kind of unexpected expense, like an unexpected car repair or an unexpected medical expense. And what I'd like to show you here is that the two municipalities that are have the highest fraction of households that are severely cost burdened in the county at over 26% are the village of New Paltz and the town of Gardner. Now, if we look back over at this map, you can see that the village of New Paltz has one of the lowest median household incomes. And of course, that's because of the high proportion of students who may have very, very limited incomes there. But the other municipality with a severe cost burden is the town of Gardner, which actually has one of the highest median incomes in the county. So there, the issue is housing prices that have dramatically increased, much like in Woodstock. And so the housing affordability difficulties there are driven really by high housing costs, even when incomes are relatively high compared to the county. So that's just one illustration of how housing challenges vary across the county. Looking at the demographics, looking at the age distribution, looking at the kind of jobs that are available in the community, those will all make the housing challenges vary in different communities. And that's why the work that the Woodstock Housing Committee has been doing to really delve into what the issues are in Woodstock is so important and so valuable. So what we learned about the drivers of housing affordability on the housing cost side are that we really just have very low inventory of both homes for sale and rentals. We talked about the town historian talked about the issue of short-term rentals. That's of course one of the things that's driving low inventory, but we've also had very, very little new construction in the last 20 years across the county, except on the very high end. The vast majority of homes that have been built in the county have been larger homes with high selling prices on large lots. And so we have a real mismatch in between the homes that are built and the homes that are being demanded. And it's a phrase we started calling the missing middle in our housing committee. Often when we talk about housing affordability, there's the thought that we're talking about low income housing, but really housing is unaffordable across Ulster County for everyone but the very highest earners. And so it's not just low income housing, it's middle income housing that we're missing. One of the issues is that there's a high and rising cost of development. The cost of materials, labor, and land are all rising. Of course, we have limited infrastructure, limited places where we can build dense housing. But we also have a lengthy and uncertain approval process for new development, which adds to the cost of projects. And we frequently find that there's community opposition to new construction. And that's one of the issues we've really been taking a look at within the county housing study. Our development and approval process in recent years has typically been one that looks at projects on a one-off basis. So a developer comes along, picks a site, proposes a project, and we start having a community argument about whether that project on that site makes sense. And of course, it tends to be the folks who have the strongest reasons for being opposed to that particular project whose voices are the loudest. What we haven't had in most of our communities is a proactive conversation about what do we need and where does it make sense to build it, given all of our other priorities about land to conserve and land to use for other purposes. And so that's one of the strategies that we're really encouraging in the county housing action plan, that we make that process a proactive one, where every community takes a look at what the housing needs in the community are and make some proactive solutions for how to address it. So we're suggesting educating and engaging the community on the critical role that housing plays, not just for our neighbors' well-being, but really for our economy. We had a number of employers express to the Housing Advisory Committee that they're now having trouble hiring because folks can't find affordable places to live that are accessible to their workplaces. And of course, housing insecurity is also a critical driver for people's health. So we're encouraging every municipality to take a look at what are the policies and zoning regulations that you have around housing and what changes might you make to increase supply. Start having those proactive conversations about where does it make sense to build and what does it make sense to build there, and go out and look for the developers to build the things that you want. We're also encouraging communities to look at ways to do what they call scattered site development. That is, finding ways to build within our existing neighborhoods in ways that fill in and increase density, rather than just thinking about big housing projects, which tend to be more disruptive to the landscape framework. And look at ways to streamline those approval processes so that we can bring the cost of development down. And then we're also encouraging communities to be creative and to look at their own situations and come up with their own community-driven solutions, which is exactly what the Woodstock Housing Committee has been doing. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about what they are proposing. So I'm going to turn it back to Susan now. Thanks very much.
Hi, I'm Kirk Ritchey. I'm a co-chair of the Housing Committee along with Susan. And thank you, Evelyn, for the information. And I just wanted to say, well, the numbers are really daunting. And sometimes it feels like all the number of things that are causing it are out of our control. And yet there is a sense that I feel like it, you know, sometimes people say, oh, it's too late, or it's just the market. And that feels unacceptable, I'm sure, by many of us. And I'm reminded of what Thomas Jefferson said. He said, it's like having a wolf by its ears. It's difficult to remain in the situation. It's also difficult to get out of the situation. And I think that's really what we're facing. We can't stay in the situation we're in, and yet we have to make efforts to get out, and that too will be very challenging to us. So the thing that we're talking about is creating homes for people. And one thing that was expressed in the comprehensive plan, in the 2018 comprehensive plan, was people really needed to say, people were saying that people of diversity and their interests need to remain in Woodstock. That's what makes Woodstock special. And the other thing that we came to understand is that we're really building homes for people that we know, people we see on a regular basis in our town, workers, volunteer firemen and fire people, and the EMTs. Just last night, EMTs came to my neighbor's home with their flashing lights and sped away even quicker with those flashing lights and possibly saved someone's life. And those are the people that need homes in our town. Other people that need homes, other workers, are people that, as Evelyn said, that serve our coffee and serve our meals and work in our retail shops. They need homes. Artists and musicians who wish to live here, they need homes as well. And students and seniors who live here already, they need homes, and young families would love to live here. But all these people are people, and we want to build homes for them. And that's part of what we're expressing within the community, the housing committee. So we're working on these things, and we came up with a way in which we could communicate with people. And what we came up with was Woodstock community homes, because our community is made up of people, and the homes that we'll be building will be for the workers that I've just, and volunteers and artists and students and seniors and young families. So that's one thing that Woodstock Community Homes represents. And it's part of our campaign to educate our community on the dire need for additional housing in our town. And so we created this poster you can see on the right that was, it's posted in town, and it's also a part of our materials in our newsletter. And then we also created a logo that you can see, Woodstock Community Homes. And these are there to just help people remember of the situation we're facing. And we'll be continuing to communicate with our community as time goes by, using these means to communicate. And so we have within our, another aspect of our home, Woodstock Community Homes is our social media and our email capabilities to be in communication with people. And so we ask people to request to receive emails from us by going to the information that's there on the screen at housing@woodstockny.org. And we also ask to like us on your favorite social media site, Facebook or Instagram. And the information that the Housing Committee will be producing will be provided through those means. And that information I just listed is now going to be posted in chat for people to access, and will be posted again later. The thing that we have as a goal in our community, in our committee, is to create housing options, as we've spoken about. And that, again, for Woodstockers, but we also would love to have these built by Woodstockers so that we can create jobs. And also we want to strive to try to protect and prevent, in the present and the future, any real estate market pressures. So we'll be speaking about that in a moment. But the committee's role is really to explore and advocate for solutions, and then to set targets and assess progress. And so one of the things that we've done is we've made an effort to reach out to our community since the beginning. And we lost our ability to meet with our community. We were going to have a community meeting last spring, and the pandemic prevented us from meeting face to face. Then we also lost our newspaper. And so what we are doing this evening is reaching out to our community now and saying that we need to be in communication with each other, and we're here to gather more input from people. And so what we've done is we've gathered a few recordings of people. We've asked a number of people in our town to record their experience and to share that with you this evening, so you can see and get a sense of what others, possibly similar to you, are experiencing. So we would like to share some of those videos with you now. Thank you. And afterwards, what we'll do, Susan and I will then share some of the solutions that the committee has developed. And we'd like to share those with you after we have these videos. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tamara Cooper, and I'm the Program Director of Family of Woodstock's Hotline in Woodstock, New York. And I'm speaking to you today about the changes that I've seen over the 27 years I've been working there with the housing situation and how it has impacted our community and impacted those people of our communities, those folks who come in to Family of Woodstock for a variety of reasons. Many people are attached to the idea of living in Woodstock. Maybe they've been here for a long time or were here for a long time. It's a place they felt safe. It's a place they felt was familiar to them. And the price of housing has grown exponentially in those 27 years. We still have quite a few people who would live in Woodstock if they could, make a big effort to come back to their community, sometimes on a daily basis from outlying areas, because they have that sense of safety and connection and community in Woodstock. So I have seen this deteriorate significantly over time, and yeah.
Hi, my name is Annalie Orslich. I am a quote-unquote Woodstocker. I was raised in Woodstock. My father was a town employee. He worked for the town over 10 years. He unionized the town workers. I raised my son, and then 20 years later was raising my daughter in Woodstock. We were living in Bearsville. I was working in town. I had 2 jobs right on Main Street, and I received a phone call from my landlord stating that I had 90 days to move. So she said she was renovating. I moved out 90 days later, and my apartment ended up falling through. But as it turns out, my landlord did not actually renovate. She wanted us apparently out so that she could rent to someone else. I'm assuming that it was for a much higher rent. I am a local business owner. I went to SUNY New Paltz. I am pretty much as local as it gets, and I cannot afford to live in Woodstock. I was in town the other day, and I brought my daughter, my 6-year-old, and she said, "Mommy, it feels so good to be home." And I told her, yeah, I'm sorry that we can't live here anymore. And I wasn't quite sure how to explain to a 6-year-old that we can no longer afford to live in our home. So now it's basically my time in Woodstock is reserved to sort of visits with my friends, a quick in and out, and maybe a slice of pizza, because I can't really afford to do much more than that in the town that I was raised in, unfortunately. Thank you.
So it's hard because we just been trying, like, 2 years ago to buy in a house or get rental, and it's really hard around here to get rental. Another thing is, like, they don't want to split up. They want to be together, and I feel like my heart is broken when I just said to them, no, here's 3 families. You have to move like in each house. You need 3 places to live. And like everybody's so sad because they don't want to split up. So I said, you need a house like they have 3 apartments, like a bigger house.
Right.
But it's hard to find in a house,
Well, also in town.
especially
So they
in
don't
town.
have to leave their community.
Another thing that people don't drive, just my brother and my sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And my other brother. This is taking years. For me, it's taking years to get good credit. 2 house. I
No.
wish I can buy 2 house.
No, you can't.
I don't have the credit to buy it.
Right.
I just have approved for a little more than 200,000 for 1 house.
Yeah.
So, and my father tried telling me like, do something. I'm like, I'm just trying for a long time, and I don't know.
Yeah.
We went to see house like a month ago, and it was far away in Saugerties, but.
I moved to Woodstock in 1985 and have been a worker in the town for 27 years. I moved here as a low-income single parent and have found it more and more difficult to stay in the Woodstock area. I feel like this is a problem for many of us who work in the town, that we want to be embedded in the community in which we work and are connected to and feel invested in, and yet more and more we're being moved out of the community into outlying areas. As a program director for Family of Woodstock, I feel central to some of the safety network for Woodstock itself, and to feel as if I can no longer to live in the community that I invest in, that I work in, that I care about, is a painful personal experience for me, and I think for many of us. At Family of Woodstock, we've seen a decline in volunteerism as people have had to recreate their financial lives, either to make more money, so less people are available within a family unit to do volunteer work in the community, or to move away so that their volunteer efforts are then dispersed into outlying communities.
So you've had some pretty strong sense of what people are facing. I'm sure the stories are not unfamiliar. At this point, we all know people who are challenged. Home sharing. This is our first project, and it is appropriately centered in sharing. Woodstock we think of ourselves as a sharing community. It is also created out of housing that already exists, so it's quite economical that way. Simply put, home sharing brings people who need housing that is in their price range together with people who are looking for some extra income, or maybe a little help with chores, or maybe a little company. Home sharing is a solution for people who are cost burdened, as Evelyn pointed out, as homeowners, pressured by taxes and upkeep, and people who are cost burdened by the gap between their modest incomes and the increasingly high cost of rentals. We looked at successful programs in other states and cities and realized we needed a reliable partner to help us run this program, so we turned to Family of Woodstock. The town, the committee, and family are working together to create this pilot program. Our first step was to do a survey of residents, which we did online between December and mid-January of this year. While many people simply wanted to show their support or ask a question, we were very gratified to see the level of actual participation that people expressed. 22 homeowners said they would be willing to take in a lodger, though some were not ready at this moment, but 12 people were, most preferring to share with a retired person or a single working person. That was not surprising. In the survey, we wondered, though, if some would offer handicapped accessibility to a person with a disability, or take in someone with hospice services at the end of their life so they could die in a home. We felt these two questions were really important, particularly given our aging population. We were surprised and pleased to have even one person open to those needs. And we had a feeling that once we start the program and have successful matches, that more people will come forward. On the other part of the survey, we were pleased to find more than 20 respondents who would be happy to rent a room in someone's home and be willing to help out in exchange for lower rent. Some were even willing to doing more for an even lower rent. We left room in the survey for comments and questions, and almost every comment was enthusiastic and supportive. We'll deal with some of the questions later. We asked two well-known Woodstockers about their long experience with their own version of home sharing. Here are Sasha Gilman and Reggie Earls. Okay, this is Sasha Gilman and Reggie Earls, who have been in their own form of home sharing relationship for 12 years. So what was it like when you first started? What was your arrangement?
When we first started, it was strictly a landlord-tenant relationship. We had an apartment to rent, and we wanted somebody who would also help us walk our dog and take care of things when we traveled. And so our relationship was not a personal one at all. But after 12 years, it really developed into a friendship and a very wonderful, wonderful friendship. And particularly after Jerry died, it was wonderful to have somebody on the property and somebody who was a friend.
Not just somebody, me.
So what was the arrangement? What were you looking for, Reggie, when you came here?
I was looking for quiet, privacy. Those are my two biggest things. Right before I found this place, I was going to rent a renovated firehouse in Kingston on the Rondout would have two other roommates. And it was a lovely place, but I really did not want to have roommates. I really wanted to live by myself. So that was the most important thing. I think quiet and privacy were my biggest things.
And what kinds of things did you, what was the arrangement that the two of you had here?
Well, the arrangement was if they were away, that I would look after Winchester, their bulldog, and feed him, walk him. I would bring the garbage down to the bottom of the driveway on trash day, and also stacking firewood for the winter, which was something I had never done before. But I became quite skilled over the years, and so those were really the basic things.
Mm-hmm. And there was a reduction in rent because of that?
It was a reduced rent based on those other things that I would help out with.
Great, great. There are many people who are going to be looking at home sharing as a new experiment for them. And it took a while for you guys to develop the relationship you have. So what would you say to people who are thinking about this as a possibility, perhaps for the first time?
There have to be kind of house rules. And those house rules have to do with the respect of the other person and the other person's wishes. We originally had an intercom between the apartment and our house. And we said to Reggie, we can get in touch with you through the intercom. And he said,
No.
I
was that as soon as that Jerry was still alive then and showing me the intercom, and I said, no, thank you. I'll have a house phone. And I insisted on that, even though he, was not insistent, but he offered it. But I said, no, thank you, because I did not want someone buzzing me. I said, you can call me like anyone else. And I really was clear about that. And I think that's really key, is being clear and being honest about whatever your needs are for both parties, because it's really, if you just try to say yes in the beginning to accommodate someone, over time you can't keep that up.
Yes,
Because I
you
think
get resentful.
you get resentful, right?
And we never use the intercom.
Right. I unplugged it and put it in the closet, and it may still be there to this day.
So just as in closing, do you think that this is this kind of a project, a pilot program, is going to be helpful to some people in Woodstock?
I I think it possibly, yes. I know for me, I've been here for 12 years. I've been able to really put down roots in Woodstock, um, and that really has been moved somewhere else. Yes, I think it's been a great possibility for people to really be here and to put down roots, to make a life.
I think this is an excellent project, and I think it is excellent for people to get over their fear of having somebody in their space that they don't know. Once you put down rules that are agreeable to both people and you get to know the other person, then the fears leave and you can establish a friendship just as you would any other.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Sasha and Reggie. That's a wonderful story, and we hope to have lots of others like that as our program gets started. Questions on our survey, I said I'd get back to that. They centered on how we would do background checks, insurance questions, what would happen if there were conflicts or other issues. All these are really important questions, and we will be answering them in the future. It's why we asked family to implement this pilot as a trusted community partner. We're also talking with the National Home Share Resource Center in Burlington, Vermont, because we want to make sure that when we begin this, we have all the resources we could possibly need to be successful from the beginning. The key to success is trust. Trust in a process that includes thorough background checks for all participants, trust in the way we make matches, and trust that the sponsors will be there to deal with any bumps in the road that come up, which it's living, so there probably will be. We're really looking forward to implementing this project. We've got 12 people who said they'd like to volunteer to help us start out of that survey. So we'll be in touch and we'll look forward to going forward with it. And we have another promising strategy, and Kirk's going to talk about that.
Hi, everyone. One of the things that we asked is that how can we make a structural change to some of the things that are causing us the market, the pressures from the market that's going on. And Woodstock Housing Committee is proposing that there be a community housing trust be launched in Woodstock. Now, what is a community housing trust? I will explain in what it is and how it works in a moment. But first, I just want to mention that a bit of history about what, in terms of community housing trust in America. 51 years ago, a first community housing trust was launched in America. There are now over 300 in America. There's numerous others throughout the world. And they all vary in what they, in their structure and what they offer, depending on if they're urban or suburban or rural. And some of the more popular, or not popular, more successful housing trusts have been in towns like ours, small towns have been most successful. And the other thing I want to mention is that the best way to explain what a community housing trust is to look at the names look at the actual name of it. So a community housing trust, let's look at each of one of those. The community, the housing development is guided by the town residents and local government representatives and members of the housing trust itself. And the land is removed from the marketplace. This is what's the structural change that I spoke of. It's removed from the marketplace for the common good of the community, in this case, Woodstock. The buildings are rented or owned, and the land is leased. And there are deed restrictions applied to the resale of those buildings. The structure itself is a nonprofit legal entity and responsible for the operations of the lands and the buildings, and performs stewardships according to take care of the lands and the buildings. The board of directors of the trust consists of local owners and renters who are part of the community housing trust, and regional housing development experts and other members of the trust. And the combination of these three things is what helps preserve affordability and long-term access to housing and prevents displacement due to market pressures. The thing that's interesting to note about this is that it's really about building a commons in our community. And one of the things I was remembering about the commons is that in the early 60s, when we had our first comprehensive plan, there was a mention that the hamlet needed more open space. There was no open space in the hamlet. And so Andy Lee Field was created. And now that many of us take that for granted. And I think that there is our community center. We have that open space for open play. Our summer residence, summer camp is there for our children, and swimming pool is there. And we have, once a year, we gather together and celebrate our volunteers. So that's a commons in our community that we use all the time. And there's other commons in our community that we also utilize, like the Como property. And another commons that's been developed over the years is the Woodstock Land Conservancy. Was developed by some private citizens some years ago, some 30 some years ago. And they have been working to preserve the wilderness and other open space in our town, with the waterway. And that commons is something we also take advantage of as a town, and it helps make our town a better place. Woodstock Community Housing Trust would be working to build a commons of homes for our community that would be forever affordable based on the structures that you see here that are outlined in what a community housing trust is. And so it would be part of us building our commons in our town, which would strengthen our town and make our town a better place to live. It's like planting a tree. Some 20 years, people say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. And the next best time to plant a tree is today. Well, we're proposing that a community housing trust be that tree, and that we could plant that tree as soon as possible this year. And maybe in some time in the future, it will be large enough to serve the needs of our housing in our town. What we'd like to do now is share with you from another community that has been facing the challenges that we're facing here for some years, Martha's Vineyard. And they started a trust some decades ago. And so they're a mature trust, community housing trust. And we have 2 videos to share with you now. The total amount of videos is 4 minutes, so it's very short. And so we'll watch those videos now, and we'll be back to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
It's incredibly rewarding every time we have a ribbon cutting, and I cry every time when we have families there who are walking into their homes that they're going to have for a long time. And in this past year, we've created year-round homes, both ownership and rental, for 41 people. We had residents move into Scotts Grove. Construction was completed in 11 months. Smalley's Knoll was on a similar timeline. And the Hanover House, from the time we acquired that property and had access to start the renovation, we had people move in within 6 months. Whether it's new construction or renovation, we want to be on a tight schedule. It's urgent. As hard as we're working, as fast as we're producing, there are still many families waiting.
I cry. I think I've seen that video a half a dozen or more times, and I cry every time they do that ribbon cutting. That can be us. We can do this. We just have to all put our heads into it, our efforts into it, our funding into it, our energies into making this happen. We can solve our housing crisis if we really work at it. So our goals for the next year are to add new members to our committee. Hopefully you've heard something really inspiring tonight that's gotten you interested in it, and we would love to have your application to join the committee. Or perhaps you'd like to join the trust. There's another of our projects that really needs your help. The Community Housing Trust is a big lift, as anybody who's been involved in the Land Conservancy can tell you. We need people with skills, we need funding, we need real passion about housing to make a Community Housing Trust work. Our committee is going to be advocating for county and state supports for housing. There's bills in the pipeline, there's legislation being drafted for funding sources, for zoning supports, and we will be out there looking, and we would like to be able to call on you to support those as well. We're going to be identifying funding sources, whether they're local banks, grants for housing, and a possible alternative funding for housing developments, depending on the kind of development it is, co-housing, cooperative ownership, all of those things. We're continuing to identify with the town-owned land for Woodstock community homes, and we'll be setting targets for what would be built on these lands and who will be served. We are collaborating with the Zoning Revision Committee on research for housing laws that support the community homes that we're talking about, including accessory dwelling units and tiny homes, but many other aspects of housing. And we will create something that supports Woodstock community homes. And we continue to build alliance partnerships with regional housing organizations like the county organization that Evelyn brings us, and as well as other communities in the county who are working as we are on housing. There'll be a slide at the end that will remind you how to get in touch with us, and we really hope you will join our effort as actively as you are able. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
I'd like to take a few moments before we move to questions and answers to thank those who helped contribute to this evening. Rennie Cantine, who helped build the building, the small house that now sits on the corner of Rock City Road and Tinker Street. And Tara DeGrossa, owner of Echo 66, for her design skills and help with the campaign launch of Woodstock Community Homes. And for Tamron Cooper, Aldo Jerome, and Anna Orsulich and Richard Hepner, Reggie Earls, Sasha Gilman, Rachel Malcolm Haven, and Susan Bizanet, and Jessica Kerr for their contributions to the testimonies you've heard this evening. Also would like to thank Evelyn Wright for presenting tonight on Ulster County's housing findings and for her support of our committee's efforts to address Woodstock's housing challenges. Thank you to everyone.
Well,
Thank you. Wow. There's so many questions that have flooded in.
Great.
Let us begin. If you're just joining us recently, please place your questions in the Q&A link rather than the chat. I'll be looking at the Q&A box. Starting from the beginning, I'm wondering how a resident could get the total number of Airbnbs from the county. I think that's a question one of you can answer very quickly.
Yeah, the latest data I have on hand tonight is from February 2020. There were just over 400 short-term rentals registered in Woodstock out of about 1,800 in the whole county. So Woodstock actually has about a quarter of all the short-term rentals in the whole county. My guess is that yours have not grown that much since then because you have tighter regulations than most of the county. So it's probably a similar amount now, and the amount in the county as a whole has probably grown.
Anyone know quickly how many residents live in the town of Woodstock?
Susan?
6,000 something?
Yeah, 6,000. We have about 3,500 buildings, if you will, residents in the area, 3,600 maybe now with this year, but about 6,000. And of that, a good percentage of those residents are second homeowners, a very large percentage. And so those are the numbers.
How will the Housing Action Plan study be released, and how will we have access to it? That's for Evelyn.
Yeah, so the county executive will announce it probably on one of his regular Tuesday, Thursday briefings when we have it out. I expect it to be any week now. We're just finalizing the production of it. So it'll get posted on our county Facebook page. And I'll put my email address in the chat. Folks can also email me and I can get it to you.
I imagine we'll have it posted on our Woodstock Community Homes page as soon as we get it as well.
Michael was wondering, Evelyn, if the incredible slides of your presentation would be available.
Yeah, I'd be glad to make them available. Actually, Susan and Kirk have them, and you can feel free to send them out.
Yeah, we'll actually be posting this entire presentation on the town website. So the same location as before, and it'll be a tab within the housing committee you'll have access to. We'll arrange for that over the coming days. So I'd say, early next week or late this week, you should have access to it. And then also the recording of this evening's event will be available for those people who have registered. So you'll be receiving information that you can access the information again directly on your own computer.
Again, I imagine we will post some
Esther,
of Evelyn's slides on Woodstock Community Homes on Facebook.
Yeah, that was such a great presentation. Esther asks, how to reconcile the need to increase the supply of housing with public resistance to multifamily development?
Well, we can throw that question right back at the 118 people who are here. How will you support this? How will you help us by standing up in meetings and supporting multifamily homes? We really need those voices to be speaking out. We need your voices to be speaking out to support this. It's the lift under our wings.
Right. The advocacy from our community will be vital for the success of the transition that this community needs to make to address the housing challenges that we're facing now.
Thank you. Question for Evelyn and Woodstock Housing co-chairs. Is there a role for land trusts throughout the county in this process, for example, to identify land best suited for housing, not only for conservation?
Not necessarily a rule. I think that the thing that we're looking at is to look at we do feasibility studies as any other group would do. RUPCO or any other housing development organization would do some level of feasibility. And as many people know, in Woodstock, a lot of our land is not. There's not infrastructure there. There's not. Most of the properties do not have direct access to water or waste systems. And so there's a very small portion of our town that has that. And so one of the reasons why it's important that we develop our own ecosystem of development, meaning of builders and such that are local, because a lot of the regional developers that are involved with this don't want to develop properties for housing unless that infrastructure is there. And so that really limits where we can build. So we feel like we could take on a greater view of our town and develop in areas that may be better appropriate for our town. Susan?
If I might add, Kirk and Joan, I think we came to the conclusion at the County Housing Advisory Committee that it's really vital to bring our land conservation conversations and our housing conversations together, and that we really have forward-looking conversations about what we need to build, where we want to build, where we want to conserve. Those are really two sides of the same coin. And I think we're going to solve this issue once we get beyond the project by project conversation to a proactive conversation about what do we want our community to look like for the next generations, and make those decisions together. And the county will be making funds available for infrastructure development to the extent that we can within communities that have had those conversations and designated where it's important to them to build and where they're going to conserve in a proactive kind of way.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think it's really important to note that Woodstock Land Conservancy and Transitions are co-sponsors of this event tonight. It's the first sort of non-nature oriented, I think, presentation in the series that's been done. And there was in the first series in the year, there was a phrase that really jumped out at me, that people finally started to realize the relationship between the plate and the planet in talking about food sources and being creative about food. I was trying to think of something that would work with housing. And when Kirk was talking about the commons before, there's a direct link between the quality of the commons, the plate, and the planet. That's a circle that's really important. And we all have to, look at that and where we are in it.
Alexandria asked a question about the county study, and she's curious about the outreach that was done to collect all this data, and such as the data on renting, which is so hard to get. Have you connected with the many mechanisms already in place and many people working very hard on these issues locally every day?
Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. That's a great question. We did not do any survey work or try to collect any new data during the study. The decision was made that we didn't want to spend a lot of time developing new data, that we really wanted to learn what we could from existing data and get right to defining solutions. So actually, it's the next step in our process to start reaching out and having dialogue with all of the different municipal bodies that are working on this. I actually have time planned to speak with Mayor Rogers later this week. So, we're really eager to speak with all of the different committees that are working on housing issues throughout the county. I'll be glad to talk with you some more.
Thank you. Rachel asks, has there been a study on the largest holders of land in the community?
We haven't actually done that particular study, but we have been looking at parcels of land that the town owns, and that also we're opening up the dialogue today to our town, and maybe those kinds of conversations can occur with some of the some town landowners in our town. Susan?
Do you envision holding open Zoom meetings throughout this process?
Absolutely, and it's part of the reason why we're doing this tonight, is we can gain a little bit more comfort, if you will. We're so used to being in face-to-face, and it's something we dearly miss, being able to meet face-to-face. And so this evening is our first attempt at this, and maybe you can see how it is. There are signs of it being the first. And but here we are. And yes, and we do have Zoom meetings every month as a committee, which are open to the public, and people are welcome to attend. I know that was a question earlier. And we've been having those open meetings since the beginning, since March of 2019. So you're welcome to attend, and our next one is later this week. You can request information on how to gain access to that by contacting the supervisor's office. Ashley will be able to provide you with that information.
Has there been any consideration of utilizing the Hudson Valley Mall that is now mostly empty as multifamily housing?
That's a question we get asked a lot. The last time I spoke with the owners of the mall about this, which was about 6 months ago, their feeling was, we're in the commercial real estate business. Residential real estate is really different, and it's not something that we have a comfort level to get into. I know that the state is planning to roll out some incentives for converting vacant retail space into housing. And I'm hoping that may catch their interest, and that they may, we're certainly ready to have that conversation with them when and if they become interested in doing so. It would be a great site for housing if it was something that they were interested in doing.
Nice views.
Yes, very nice. Michelle asks, how many homes can be provided through a housing trust versus the number of people who need affordable housing? Is there some sense of who would be served?
Well, I think we've pretty much outlined, we don't have targets set yet in terms of, each project would have a different target because of the space and the kind of housing that could be built there. But, we're looking to build senior housing. We're looking to build housing for workers, housing for families. We clearly need all sorts of housing in Woodstock. So that's what we'll be looking at. And it just depends on how many locations we can get, what sort of builders, developers come forward, whether we're building, giving people grants to do accessory dwelling units on their property, or having someone bring in a manufactured house, little tiny house cluster, whether people will come together and build a co-housing kind of a project on land that's given to the trust. It just depends. We are at the formative stage here, and we need people to come forward with land, money, building ideas, want to work.
Yeah, one of the things that we've always considered is that, we're not looking for the gigantic project where there's, many, many, many homes in one site. We're looking at having what Evelyn spoke to, where you have distributed sites going, where the homes look similar to the neighborhood and they're about the same size, and there's within that house there are 2 or 3 units. And this is something that we're looking at as well, and something that, so hopefully that would be a little bit less different for the neighborhood, and the neighbors would be a little bit more welcome to it. And also not to, think of it in terms of like, we want to do it all. We want to do everything that we possibly can. And back to the question, it's really the people that we spoke to. We really, our particular town has rental needs right now, really big challenge around rentals, right? So that's what we'll be looking to build first, if we can, is that type of access to housing. You go to another town, like in New Paltz, I was talking with the deputy supervisor there, and they have a lot of rentals, obviously for the school and everything, but they have different type of challenges, right? So, but our particular town right now, rentals are seriously in need, and good rentals that are good quality housing for people, and then you feel proud to live there, and that are ones that can be afforded by people who live here.
Does the town of Woodstock own any land that can be contributed to a community housing trust for development?
Well, that's 2 different things there. The town owns the land, and maybe they would be gifting the trust at some point. But I think that also there's a possibility that trust could be just simply the manager of that site once it's developed. So there'd be sort of a management fee, if you will. That would be, the trust would operate on. But the town does own some sites. As a committee, we've evaluated a number of the town-owned sites. And there's some large sites that we'll probably get to later, but some smaller sites that are peppered throughout the town, we're looking at, and we're seeing what would be possible there.
Connor's asking, have you done any work to identify plots or properties for rezoning? Example, R5 or R8 plots suitable for PRD.
We're still doing research on, we really are not, there's another committee that has been started as a result of the comprehensive plan in 2018, and that's the Zoning Revisions Committee. We've been doing a lot of research as a housing committee as to what would be appropriate to be recommended to that committee, and we're ready to work with them. But we're just simply doing research on that, and it's up to them to bring some of the ideas forward. Susan, do you have more to add to that?
I just want to say that it's really key to have a housing trust to make this work, because then we have control. We have control over the land, what's built on it, setting, the trust will set its own guidelines for how to get people into whatever lottery will exist to get people to live in the properties. And so the trust is really key to, we don't want to go off developing things without knowing how they're going to be controlled. Otherwise, they're going to be where most projects are, which is sunsetting in 30 years after their funding source says they can go back to market value. We want things that are affordable, kept what we call sustainable for forever.
I want to add to that what Susan just said, which was really great. One thing that the trust will do and can do is approach housing from a strategic perspective. Like, what does the town need? What are the needs of the town? So we can actually approach it from a realistic perspective. And how much of the rentals do we need? How much social housing do we need? How much single family homes that are first-time home buyers do we need? And where can we do that? So it's more of a strategic approach. And that's what the trust would be able to accomplish. Take ownership of, and then remember what we said. The trust is made up of community members, government representatives, and trust organization members. So there's a balance there. There's a balance between the contributors and the views, and the governance is really quite balanced in that regard. And so I'm really looking forward to the trust getting launched.
And like the Land Conservancy, really it's the same kind of an organization. It's a nonprofit. It has goals that are strictly for housing in this case, and sets its own rules, has its own bylaws, has its own funding, collaborates with the town, maybe takes land from the town or manages land from the town, but it is not subject to control by the town. It is a community organization, and that's really important.
Yeah, Susan, good point. It is not a government agency, the trust. It is a privately owned, it's citizen action, if you will, and it will be a nonprofit corporation that will have as a focus, to coordinate the needs of our town's housing.
Laura asks, if someone moves into housing built by the trust, are they always renting, or do they have an option to buy?
Well, actually, yes. The short answer is yes, they have an option to buy, and there could be something associated with where they live. It could be a rent to own, or they could be, be renting and then be under some kind of program, if you will, that would help them save for ownership, and then possibly move to another property that was meant to be owned. Okay, and then that property that they were renting would then go to someone else who would be renting. So all of those things are possible.
All right, this is probably getting close to the end of our Q&A. Anna says, I'm going to read the whole thing. Also, as a Woodstocker who can no longer afford to live in Woodstock, I have racked my brain regarding alternative housing options. My mother owns 3 acres in West Hurley. We recently petitioned the West Hurley Planning Board for a variance to divide my mother's 3-acre property. We have done everything to find alternative housing solutions, and all we have heard from the West Hurley building inspector is no, based on archaic building codes. Understanding that Woodstock is limited and its land supply, is anyone working with the surrounding towns to update the county's zoning to better represent the current housing crisis?
Evelyn.
So that is a great question. So zoning is community by community in New York State. And so, you know, the county's role here and what we're going to be doing through the county housing action plan is really trying to work with every municipality to take a look at their zoning codes, their short-term rental regulations, their regulations around accessory dwelling units, and all of their planning and zoning to help identify where there are things that may not be serving the community's needs and help update them. So, you know, there are those issues everywhere throughout the county, and you know, the county planning department is certainly eager to help every municipality take a look at what we can do to increase our housing supply. Let me just say a little bit more about that. You know, I think the work that you all are doing here tonight is so important, and I just want to emphasize what Kirk and Susan have said about the vital need for folks to get involved. You know, I think this is one of those cases where we all sort of know there is a problem, but so far it hasn't quite risen to the level of a community clamor. And that's really what we need. We really need a coalition of residents and people who are in the business community, people who are in the healthcare community, people who are in the education community, people who are in the arts community, to really come together and say, this is a problem we need to tackle, because that's what it's going to take to update our outdated zoning, to change our practices, to create new institutions like the Community Housing Trust. We really have to come together and work on solutions, because otherwise, you know, inertia and momentum will just keep taking us in the wrong direction.
Yeah, what I said in the beginning about wanting to share the urgency. As Kirk said, you know, the best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago, when it was really rolling a boulder uphill, those of us who were involved then in housing issues in Woodstock. But we can plant a tree now, and that's really the time to do it, because here we are, problems hasn't gone away, isn't going to go away, and we need to take it and do something with it, really work on it, and we need everybody with us doing it.
Yeah. And one other comment around the two things is that I want to reemphasize for those people who are really in need and either have been displaced and want to come back to Woodstock or are about to be displaced because the owner's cashing out on their homes and they're asking you to leave. You know, the home share is a wonderful program, and it could be a stepping stone for people to remain here while the Housing Trust gets launched and while we develop the ability to get some of the tools in place to build. And the thing also too that the trust will bring, just a shift away from the home share. I think the home share again could be a very, very successful program in that way of addressing people's needs in the short term and the long term for some people. Can help keep seniors in their homes too, for some of the seniors who are facing troubles. But back to the trust, some people were texting me while we're receiving here, and they're giving me information. I want to emphasize that the trust will be that player at the table that will be able to develop relationships with builders and be able to develop relationships with the real estate agents and different people. So the trust will be at the table, right? And that's an important thing. We're losing properties in our town, and we could have possibly been involved with some of those properties that just got recently sold. And we could have been there if we had the trust in place. So this is what we're hoping to accomplish in the near term, is that the organization will be established soon, and that we will be able to begin to participate in the goings-ons of developing and building homes for people that need it the most.
So one more time, if people want to get in touch, someone from Hurley is saying, hey, can we merge into this project, and how can we, can you give that information one more time? How to connect people?
Well, the information is in chat, but if you need to hear it, you can share it. We will post this. We will send it out through our social media. We'll put it out in, in Facebook, and then also in Instagram, and we'll send emails for those who wish to receive emails. You can get the information on the government's site under housing, under the tab for housing. So all the information will be there. We'll distribute it wherever we can. And you can reach out to me directly, or Susan, possibly. I'm not sure if I'm volunteering people private information. But basically, if you need the information, we will get it to you.
Yeah. And Evelyn put her contact information for the folks from Hurley and Saugerties who wanted to be connected. You can talk to Evelyn about coming to your town board to make a presentation. That's where Woodstock is beginning.
Right.
So, be an active player where you are.
Thank you. So thanks for this wonderful Q&A session. I'll pass it back now.
All right. Well, thank you so much to everyone who contributed to tonight's program. It's a lot of videos and microphones to turn off and on there. This is an important conversation, and it's going to continue. And I feel like I better, eat my Wheaties and get energetic, because we have a lot of work to do. So got to roll up our sleeves. So thank you again to the presenters and for bringing all this information forward. If you registered for this webinar on Zoom, you will receive a follow-up email within the next couple of days that will also contain all of these resources and website links and contact information. Again, it will also have the link to the recording, which will be posted on YouTube within a few days. And that's open to everyone in the public. You don't have to have been registered for the webinar. So you can share it with anybody, and it'll be posted everywhere as well. So our film and discussion series this year has 4 events. We have 2 more to go. They're always on the last Monday of each month. So we have one on March 29th, and the last one will be on April 26th. Next month's event is going to have a film and some presentations. It will be about the Hudson Valley Farm Hub, one of their programs that looks to preserve biodiversity and deliver ecosystem services to crops. So to manage farmland, to do both of those things. So that should be quite interesting to hear about this pretty big neighbor we have right in Hurley. The April event will explore the relationship between regenerative agriculture, planetary, and human health. And we really do miss being with all of you in person a lot. But we were happy that we didn't have to decide whether or not we were canceling tonight's event because of the snow. That was a silver lining. And again, the fact that the webinars are recorded, so you can, if you miss it, you can watch it. If you miss January's, which was a great program, you can just go find it on YouTube and watch it. And I think with that, we're going to conclude this evening. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a good night.